Okay, so we have three equations. Each of them have x, y, and z, and we're going to use matrix methods to solve. So just like before, each one of these equations becomes a row in our matrix. So we're going to have three rows in our matrix this time. So if the first equation is going to become the first row, we've got 2. Pull that 2 from the 2x. Then we just have 1y, negative 3z, so negative 3. We've got our bar that represents our equal sign, negative 4. That's our first row. Okay, the second equation becomes the second row, 4, negative 2, 1, 9. And the third equation becomes the third row, 3, 5, negative 2, 5. Okay, so just like before, we do have a goal that we want to reach with this matrix. There's a certain way that we need our matrix to look. So we need our matrix to look like this. We need zeros in these three spots in this bottom left corner. The rest of these numbers, we don't care what they are. They could be anything. That's why I just put variables in. So as long as these three spots in our matrix are 0, then we're good. So we don't have to change the first row at all. We move on and we look at the second row and we get this first number to become a 0. Then we move on to the third row and we get these two numbers to become zeros. Okay, so let's do that with this example. The first row isn't going to change. We look at the second row, and where this 4 is, we need that 4 to become a 0. So the easiest way to do that is to use the first row. Look above the 4, we've got a positive 2. We need that number to cancel out with this positive 4. So we need it to become a negative 4. So to get this positive 2 to become a negative 4, we would multiply by negative 2. So we're going to take negative 2 and we're going to multiply it by row 1. And then we're going to take that and add it to row 2. Okay, so the first row isn't going to change. We're just using it to change the second row. So I'm going to go ahead and write the first row in, but I'm going to space it out because we're going to have to do some math in the second row. So 2, 1, negative 3, negative 4. And in the second row, we're using this as a formula for each spot in the second row. So for the first spot, we've got negative 2 times row 1, which would be 2, plus row 2, which is 4. Second spot, negative 2 times row 1, which would be 1, plus row 2, which is negative 2. Next one, we've got negative 2 times row 1, which is negative 3, plus row 2, which is 1. And the last spot, -2 times row 1, which is -4, plus row 2, which is 9. And then our third row is staying the same for now, 3, 5, -2, 5. Okay. The next step is just to do that little bit of math in the second row. So the first row is staying the same, 2, 1, -3, -4. And then the second row, we've got -2 times 2, which is -4, plus 4, which is 0. That's what we wanted to happen. We did that on purpose. So if you didn't get a 0 here, you did something wrong. Okay, we've got -2 times 1, which is -2, plus -2 is -4. -2 times -3 is +6, plus 1 is 7. -2 times -4 is +8, plus 9 is 17. The third row stayed the same, 3, 5, -2, 5. Okay, that's the only thing that we had to do for the second row. We just had to change that first number to a 0. Now we can move on to the third row. We need the first two numbers in the third row to be zeros. So if we need this 3 to become a 0, we're going to have to use the first row to do it because the first number in the second row is 0. So we need to get 2 to become a -3 so that it would then cancel out with this +3. So to get a 2 to become a 3, we would need to multiply by 3 halves. Okay, if you don't know how to figure that out in your head, you can use a calculator. All you have to do is 3 divided by 2, and that'll tell you what you need to multiply 2 by in order to get 3. So 3 divided by 2 is 1.5, or if you change that to a fraction, 3 halves. But we also need, we don't just need a 3, we need it to be -3 so that it'll cancel out with this +3. So we need to multiply by -3 halves. -3 halves times row 1, and then we're going to add that to row 3. Okay, so the only thing that's changing is row 3. So we can go ahead and write in the first 2 rows. Just remember to space them out. 2, 1, -3, -4. Second row, 0, -4, 7, 17. And then for the third row, we're using this formula. -3 halves times row 1, which is 2, plus row 3, which is 3. Then we've got -3 halves times row 1, which is 1, plus row 3, which is 5. -3 halves times row 1, which is -3, plus row 3, which is -2. Last one, -3 halves times row 1, which is -4, plus row 3, which is 5. Okay, let's do that little bit of math in the third row. So the first two rows stay the same. Okay, the third row, -3/2 times 2 is -6/2, which is -3, plus 3 is 0, which is what we were trying to get to happen. Okay, -3/2 times 1 is -3/2 plus 5. We can do 5 minus 3/2. 3.5, which is 7/2. Okay, the next one, -3/2 times -3 is 9/2 plus -2 or minus 2, 5/2. Last one, -3/2 times -4 is 12/2, which is 6, plus 5 is 11. Okay. Okay, you guys take a short break really quick. Okay, so in the third row, if we remember what we're needing here, we also need a 0 in this spot where right now there's a 7/2. So we need to use another row to help us change this to a 0. What we don't want to do is use the first row, because if we use the first row and add it to the third row, no matter what we do, this 0 will end up changing back to a number, and we don't want that to happen. But since there's a 0 in that spot in the second row, if we use the second row to change this number, that 0 remains the same. So we're not going to create more work for ourselves. So to figure out how to get this -4 to cancel out with this 7/2, we'll do the same thing that we did earlier. We're going to do 7/2 divided by 4. We get 7/8. So what that means is 4 times 7/8 is going to give us 7/2. And since this is a -4, we'll end up with a -7/2, which will then cancel with this positive 7/2. Okay, so just to show you what I mean, we'll have -4 times 7/8. So row 2 times 7/8, which gives us a -7/2, that when we add to a positive 7/2, we get 0. So we're doing 7/8 times row 2 plus row 3. That's our next step. 7/8 times row 2 plus row 3. So the first row stays the same for now. Make sure and space it out. 2, 1, -3, -4. Second row is not changing. 0, -4, 7, 17. What we're changing is the third row, and we're using this formula to do it. 7/8 times row 2, so 7/8 times 0, plus row 3, which is 0. Second number, we've got 7/8 times row 2, which is -4, plus row 3, which is 7/2. Next, 7/8 times row 2, which is 7, plus row 3, which is 5/2. Last one, 7/8 times row 2, which is 17, plus row 3, which is 11. Okay, let's do that math. First two rows aren't changing. Okay, we've got 7/8 times 0, which is 0, plus 0, which is still 0. 7/8 times -4. Remember, we got a -7/2 when we did that, so that when we add it to 7/2, we get 0. Okay, the next number we have 7/8 times 7 plus 5/2, which is 69/8. I know it's not a very fun fraction, but I would still rather you keep these numbers as fractions than write the decimal form. The fractions are going to be easier in the end. So we've got 69/8. Then we've got 7/8 times 17 plus 11, which is 207/8. Okay, now we have zeros in the 3 spots that we needed to have zeros. Once you get to that point, you change each of these rows back into equations. So our first row didn't change. We still have 2x plus y minus 3z equals -4. In the second row, we have 0x, which means we don't have an x term. Then we have -4y plus 7z equals 17. And the last row, 0x, 0y, we've got 69/8z equals 207/8. Okay, so we're not finished. We still need to get values for x, y, and z. So we're going to start with this third equation first because it only has a z variable. So we should be able to solve for z in this equation. 69/8z equals 207/8. We're going to solve this for z. So the first thing that we can do is multiply both sides by 8. What that's going to do is cancel out the 8s and leave us with 69z. Cancel out the 8s on this side. We're left with 207. Divide both sides by 69 to get z by itself. 207 divided by 69 is 3. So we get z equals 3. Okay, now we can look at this second equation that just has a y and a z. If we plug in our value for z, we should be able to solve for y. So we've got negative 4y plus 7z, but instead of z, we're plugging in what z is equal to, which is 3, equals 17. Okay, so solve for y. 7 times 3 is 21. Subtract 21 from both sides. (17 minus 21 is negative 4. Divide both sides by negative 4 to get y equals 1. Now we have a value for z, a value for y. So we're going to go back up into this first equation, plug those values in, and then we'll be able to solve for x. So 2x plus y, but we know y is 1, minus 3z, but we know z is 3, equals negative 4. Three times 3 is 9. 1 minus 9 is negative 8. So we have 2x minus 8 equals negative 4. Add 8 to both sides. We have 2x equals 4. Divide both sides by 2. We get x equals 2. So our solution is 2, 1, 3. Okay, I know that that's a lot of work. It's a lot of steps for one problem. I think I want to wait until next time to do another example with you. I'm not going to give you a set of practice problems yet. What I want you to do instead is there's a lot of you who still have not turned in assignments. I started looking at grades on Friday. I haven't entered any yet because I'm finding that a lot of you have not turned things in. So I want to give you one more chance to spend the rest of the time today working and get that stuff turned in to me. Once you finish a worksheet or finish your work, all you have to do is email me a photo of it so that I can have it to grade. And then I'll be getting grades entered today so that you should be able to see if you're still missing something or what you made on the ones that you already turned in. Anybody have questions for me about what you should be doing?
I just need to know which assignments I have to do, or assignment or whatever.
Okay. Well, right now there's 3 assignments: solving by substitution, solving by elimination, and then the 3 equations, solving systems of 3 equations. So if you can't find those in your bag, or if you know that you emailed me photos of any of those. You can check your emails. But I won't be able to tell you that until this afternoon after I've gone through everything. So once I do that, I will let you know if you're still missing anything. But if you're confident that you've turned in those 3 assignments, then you should be good. Anybody else have questions? Okay, if you don't have questions for me, then you are free to leave the Zoom. If you don't hear from me this afternoon, then make sure you check your Hack account and see if you're missing any assignments, because I should have those grades put in by later this afternoon. All right, see you guys next time.